So I'll start with a traditional homage to the Triple Gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasami. Traditionally, just the speaker does that, but it's okay. We had a question and answer session last night during our weekly YouTube live stream, and one person asked about the Buddhist path to enlightenment, specifically his training with the first two teachers he encountered dealt with very refined states of concentration, what we call the base of infinite nothingness and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And if you're confused as to what those means, that's pretty much where most of us are. Confused, that is. But they, and it's rare for people to encounter these states on their practice. And the story of the Bodhisattvas, the Buddha before he was the Buddha, his journey says that he trained under these two teachers who cultivated these states, and he mastered them both. But where they thought that these were the ultimate, he realized that they were just one more state of being and were conditioned and destined to disintegrate, and that they weren't awakening. So he left and cultivated ascetic practices for a period of time, during which he starved himself and nearly died. And then there's the story of how he realized that he couldn't continue in that ascetic path, that his flight from pleasure of any kind and his attempt to distance himself from the body through these refined states of concentration, which are very intellectual, weren't leading to awakening. And in the suttas it says that he asked himself, why am I afraid? That a memory arose of when he was a child sitting under the rose apple tree during a plowing festival. And the tradition says that in that moment he slipped into a deep state of concentration, the first jhana. And it was calm and blissful and blameless. And he thought, why am I afraid of pleasure like that, that is blameless? And then in the suttas it says, the thought arose, I'm not afraid of that pleasure. And he says, is this the path to enlightenment? And in the suttas it says, the thought arose, this is the path to enlightenment. So from there he returns to the practice of the jhanas, which in the suttas are defined as samma samadhi, or right concentration, and attains awakening. What is so meaningful about that sutta is it represents this moment of humility and grace where, after pushing himself and striving with such dedication and trying so hard to move past everything else. The Buddha remembers just that simple experience of sitting under a tree, watching his father plow a field in the cool of the afternoon, with his sense of safety and inhabiting his body and just slipping into that calm right there. Something so simple is the path. And how what his practice became after that was a cultivation of the jhanas, which are somatic in their nature. They're bodily. They're states of concentration associated with the body. They're deeply embodied. Every description of them involves this. The Buddha gives analogies. And in the analogies, frequently it describes how one in these states pervades one's body with the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, born of composure, until no part of that body is unpervaded by that rapture and pleasure. So that can sound kind of esoteric and distant, but it's helpful to remember that it's just coming back to this body, just this simple experience of being here. And obviously the jhanas have much, it's not like you just come into the present moment and suddenly slip into one of these states, but the path to them is through this somatic sense. And the motion described in that narrative of stepping back into simplicity and humility is, I think, one of the more beautiful moments in the suttas. It's like Longpo Pasno says, that we're always looking past awakening. We're always looking past it. We miss it because we look beyond it. So coming back to this simplicity in our practice and gentleness. And I was listening to speaking to another practitioner recently who was asking how to direct her practice, how far to push herself, how much to structure her life around these things. Because she'd really tasted the beauty of this path and its direction, and wanted to figure out how to embody that in a life. And then I heard a talk by Longpo Suchitto, one of the teachers in our traditions, where he talked about how you can't swallow too much of it at a time. That it's like the path is a very potent medicine, and however much we want to just dump the whole jar of aspirin down our throats, it kind of helps to take it one pill at a time and to savor it and let it sink in. And specifically that has to be done through the body. These are just, the teachings can be held as one more set of intellectual constructs that we fail to live up to, because that's what we do. We take intellectual constructs and then we fail to live up to them. So how can the teaching not be that? And it involves coming back and letting these teachers sink in and impact the heart and change the whole tenor of our spirits little by little. And it's not a fast process. Ajahn Jayasaro says this path there's two speeds on the path, and that's slow and slower. But compared to slower, slow is fast. And what you're moving through is so seismic, so profound, that in reality it's unbelievably quick. When you see the difference in your life year to year, that bringing a meditation practice every morning, every evening, 20 minutes a day at least, changes how you experience the rest of your life. These are not small changes, and they are not slow. But it can deceptively seem that way. And that aspect of patience, of letting these teachings sink in little by little and just letting them resonate into the body, is so essential as we approach this. So this is one of the powers of breath meditation. The Buddha singled out breath meditation as what he termed the Abode of the Tatagata, which was his epithet for himself. This was the meditation where he abided. And in the West, it's been taught very simply, frequently, as just follow your breath at the nose and don't control it. Sorry, try not to control it, which is an oxymoron in itself. And then eventually things will click and you'll snap into a state of concentration. And there's a sutta called the Aritta Sutta where the Buddha asks the bhikkhus, how do you practice mindfulness of breathing? And one well-intentioned venerable one says, I mindfully, putting aside thoughts of the past and future, I breathe in, and mindfully I breathe out. And the Buddha says, yes, Venerable Aritta, that's his name, that is mindfulness of breathing, I do not deny it. But as to how mindfulness of breathing is practiced in full, listen and I will speak. And then he describes the 16 steps of breath meditation found in the Ānāpānasati Sutta, the discourse on mindfulness of breathing. And these 16 steps are a robust and detailed framework for how we work with the breath, how we come back into our bodies, how we reacquaint ourselves with this innocent and yet essential voice which is in the chest and the heart that guides us and can help show us how best to live a life in line with Dhamma and worthy of our lives and of our deaths. So the sutta begins by directing one to breathing in long, one knows, I breathe in long. Breathing out long, one knows, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, one knows, I breathe in short. Breathing out short, one knows, I breathe out short. And these first two steps compose the first two of the 16. And the 16 steps are divided into 4 sets of 4, which we term tetrads. And each tetrad aligns with one foundation of mindfulness. So the first 4, the first tetrad aligns with the mindfulness of the body. The second tetrad, steps 5 through 8, align with mindfulness of feelings. The third tetrad aligns with mindfulness of mind. And the fourth tetrad aligns with mindfulness of dhammas, or dhamma categories. So there's a lot there. These first 2 steps are just a very clear and simple way to anchor your awareness at the beginning of a meditation, because you're evaluating the breath. You're seeing, is it long, is it short? And you can substitute terms like heavy, light, shallow, forced. Just see how the breath is, and tracking it in that way really, because you're looking at it very carefully, it just anchors awareness at first. And you can also adjust the breath a bit. We have a tendency to control, and until the meditation is calmed, sometimes that tendency is quite strong, which is why it can be helpful to work with it consciously. Because if we just tell ourselves to not control things at all, sometimes the intention moves into a subterranean level and works anyways at us. And that's when breath can become constricted and tight and hot and forced. So if you need to emphasize the inhalation, then you can do that to energize yourself, or emphasize the exhalation to calm. Just find a rhythm that feels good. And you can even, instead of telling yourself directions, with we who are so controlling by nature, it can be helpful to direct oneself through questions. So asking oneself, what sort of breath feels good now? Can I take a delicious breath? Can I breathe in long? Ask yourself a question and let the mind, what we call the chitta, and the body respond of their own accord. the third step is one trains thus: breathing in, I will become sensitive to the whole body. Breathing out, I will be sensitive to the whole body. And this step is what we were focusing on with the guided meditation, is as Westerners and modern people, we tend to be utterly alienated from our bodies. So Ajahn Amaro says that it's like we are, most of us conceive of our bodies as these things that keep our necks from dragging on the ground. And there's a great quote he uses from the Dubliners, James Joyce, where I believe Joyce says that Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body, viewing his thoughts and actions with sidelong, suspicious glances. And that's how a lot of us exist through the world. We're very distant from ourselves. So a huge portion of this really critical step is just coming back into your body and learning ways to drop the awareness from the head, where most of us spend our days, into the torso and below. So another difficult thing that's manifested in this transmission of these teachings to the West and throughout history has also been that this step gets interpreted as only be aware of the whole body of the breath at the nose. So this is where this instruction of just pinpoint awareness at one spot and just follow the breath there and don't change where your mind moves. And for modern people who think a lot, this can be like taking a classroom of second graders and telling them to shut up and sit down and take a test. Whereas if we take this other interpretation, which is more and more what teachers that I know are interpreting it as, at least one valid interpretation, is interpreting it truly as the whole body. And when we do that, we can explore the body. We can move awareness through it. We can feel the different resonances through different areas of that body. We can release tension. We can become skilled using the breath because we no longer conceptualize breath simply as the coarse wind at the nostrils, but rather as this subtle energy coursing through the body, what's termed in Sanskrit prana, what's termed in Pali pana, as in Ānāpānasati, the breath energy, chi. And when we do this, then suddenly meditation can become very interesting, and we work with the thinking mind instead of against it. Because we can begin meditation by exploring and becoming skilled at relating to our bodies and moving awareness and the energy through the body. And then it's a bit like taking that classroom of screaming second graders and letting them out into the yard and letting them do some wholesome team builder or run around and collect some samples from the pond, get their energy out. And then after you've circled a bit, after you've explored and dropped awareness and reacquainted yourself with the body, then you come down to one spot again. And that's when the second graders sit down and take their test, and they're a bit more tired, so it's okay. So at this third step, it's helpful to have that idea that that can be what we do then, is you can use different skillful means to become aware of the whole body. That circuit of 3 chambers and then expanding to encompass the whole body is one very useful means. There's other very skillful visualizations you can use, such as one contained in Ajahn Nisabho's book, Keeping the Breath in Mind, or With Each and Every Breath, which is taught by Tanpor Lee. And that involves imagining the breath as a white light that pours in through the crown of the head, courses down the spine and out the legs, and then out the other leg, and then down through the back of the neck, over the shoulders, out the fingers, and then in through the mouth, down to the, believe, chest, and then into the chest, down to the dantian, the place about 2 finger breadths above the navel. And you don't have to keep those visualizations completely timed with the breath, because that's exhausting. It's a lot of movement. But just slowly visualize the light as gold light moving along those meridians. And it's just one more skillful means of dropping awareness into the body. The analogy the Buddha gives for the first jhana, which is related to this tetrad, this step, although not everyone in this step will be in the first jhana, but it's a helpful image, is he says, just as a bathman or a bathman's apprentice would knead water into a ball of bath powder so that no part of that ball of bath powder was unpervaded by that moisture, even so, a practitioner pervades and permeates their body with the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion until no part of the body is unpervaded. So in this analogy, the hands of the bathman is what we call directed thought and evaluation. It's applied perception, it's active, it's actively kneading awareness into the body. And that's where we use all these very active perceptions, like imagining the light as a white mist or something like this, is you're really trying to pervade the body with your awareness again, with this cool breath energy. And other skillful means, because we are so alienated from our bodies, may include Qigong. That's something that a lot of senior monks use, many. And a great book is one called The Way of Energy, which details several standing poses. Cold water can be very helpful. Cold showers, I recommend these all the time. I don't know how many people take me up on them, but that can clarify the breath energy quite a lot. A bit of exercise, yoga, whatever helps you reacquaint yourself with the body and begin to become sensitive to this breath energy is helpful. Ajahn Sucitto teaches Qigong at every retreat he does. So the next step is, and the first 2 steps of breathing in long and short, and knowing those breaths, Bhante Analayo compares to a condor flapping its wings to rise. Whereas this 3rd step of being aware of the whole body is a bit like when the condor just soars on still wings. The 4th step is one trains thus. I will breathe in, calming the bodily activity or bodily formations, kaya sankhara. I will breathe out, calming the bodily formations. And at its most basic, this can just be thought of as seeing how, as you become aware of that whole field of the body, you notice that the sense of needing to move the lungs in and out as intensely fades, and there's much more of a sense of being okay just feeling the breath move and circulate naturally, and you can relax that motion of the breath and it'll become more and more subtle and refined. And the 5th step, which moves into mindfulness of feelings, is one breathes in and out sensitive to, the Pali word is piti, P-I-T-I, which can be translated as rapture or refreshment. It's probably best translated as refreshment. The word piti is etymologically related to the Pali word for drinking, to drink. And in the commentaries, it's frequently compared to a thirsty man bending down to a cool pool of water and taking his first drink. And there's this sense, after you've been aware of the whole body for a time, where you do begin to sense the breath energy coursing up and through the body, Frequently, people will notice this around moving up the spine and down the front of the head, down the front of the body in a circuit. Or sometimes you can track it the opposite direction, up the front of the body and down the spine. And there's a sense of this refreshing and welling up and soaking this energy in, this chi, this pana. And you can, really cultivate that, as you become sensitive to the different places you can place awareness in the body and breathe. You might notice that when your awareness is placed in the lower chamber near the tailbone, there's a sense of deep, nourishing energy that rises into the body. Whereas when awareness is placed high up in the head, there's a sense of bright, cool light that comes down. Or you might sense that as you visualize the breath as sort of a white light or a white mist, you can, sort of pervade the parts of the body that have been starved for it. So frequently that'll be the lower parts of the body, or we usually neglect our whole backside, so our kidneys, imagining a white mist coming in and out through the kidneys. Ajahn Nisabho, a famous teacher in Thailand, told me that one of his breakthroughs in breath meditation was imagining breathing through his shoulder blades. So just experiment, try to soak the whole body in this sense of well-being. And in each of these steps, it's important to reflect that the breath is always present in the periphery. You're not dropping one object for the other. You're foregrounding and backgrounding an object. And always in the background is the breath. Because at every one of these steps, it begins with breathing in, blank. Breathing out, blank. So that's your refrain. And it's essential because if you lose that, you're losing and letting go of the cause of all of these other recollections and perceptions. It's like Ajahn Nisabho compares it to stepping off of a scaffolding into the clouds, and they'll fade quite quickly. So this is your grounding, always anchoring yourself to the breath. And if the mind begins to wander or become too distracted, then you come back to that breath. And similarly, what you may find is that the mind oscillates from a robust conception of any of these steps, say being aware of the whole body, or being aware of this sort of nourishing sense of refreshment. It might oscillate from that and then come right back down to that simple breath at the very tip of the nose, or at that other point where you feel most centered, and just wanting to track the breath very carefully there, like a silk thread. And if that's the case, then it's fine to let it do that. Let it come back and center and track and just be with the breath. Because that third step of being aware of the whole body, as it's been interpreted in many traditions as being aware of the whole body of the breath, is valid. So just, if the mind wants to be there at that one refined point, then let it. But it may then expand again. And once again, you're not completely dropping the other wider field of the body, but you're foregrounding one and backgrounding the other in the periphery. The analogy the Buddha gives for the second jhana is just as if there was a mountain lake with no inflows on the north, south, east, or west, fed by cool springs from below and showers from above, so that no part of that mountain lake would be unpervaded by that cool water. Even so, a practitioner pervades and permeates their body with the rapture and pleasure born of concentration. So the significant part of this analogy, even though it's of the second jhana, and this step isn't necessarily attached to the second jhana, but there's a lot of resonance there. In that, where in that first analogy you had the bathman's hands kneading in the water, so we are applying these perceptions, we are pretty active, moving through the body. In this analogy, the water's rising all on its own. It's just the spring moving water into that lake. And similarly, as you've become aware of the whole body and begin to sense this natural flow of the breath energy along the meridians, up the spine, down the front of the body, there's no need to do anything. You just feel the body slowly soaking it up. And you can really let go, in a sense. The sixth step is breathing in. One trains thus: breathing in, I will be sensitive to pleasure, sukha. One trains thus: breathing out, I will be sensitive to pleasure. So where in the commentaries the sense of piti, refreshment, is compared to a thirsty man drinking his first taste of the water, where he's soaking it up, there's a sense of rapture. Sukha, pleasure, is compared to how he feels once he's really drunk his fill and his body's filled with that cool water. So this is that sense after you've really soaked up that energy of just a fullness, a sense of being able to just rest in stillness. And where piti is a sankhara, it moves. Sankhara's key element, it's a term in Pali, is that it has an element of intention. It's dynamic. So it's rising, it's moving through the body, it's soaking in. Sukha is vedana, feeling. Feelings are still. They're static. They don't move. So sukha is that sense of just a still field that emerges, a sense of fullness. It's a bit like how a circuit of electricity running through a wire creates an emergent magnetic field. So similarly, this circuit of breath energy moving through the body creates this emergent bright field of sukha. The analogy the Buddha gives for the third jhana, which can connect to this, is of a pond of red, white, and blue lotuses immersed in water, so that no part of those lotuses, from their stems to their tips, would be unpervaded by the cool water. And even so, one pervades one's body. I believe one's body is pervaded by pleasure. I think that's right. So in this analogy, there's no motion. The lotuses are in a still pool of water. Everything is calmed. There's no motion. Frequently, this is the stage where a perception of light becomes very prominent in people's awareness. And people miss it a lot because you expect to see kind of an orb of light or something. But for people, frequently it's more a just brightening of the whole visual field, and you can miss it. Similarly, if you've cultivated a meditation object called the sound of silence, the nada sound, which is one taught by Ajahn Nisabho, it's a subtle ringing or hissing right below it's always there, but it's below what you hear. And if you cultivate it, it can become very stable and loud. Ajahn Amaro can hear it over power tools. And it's a very powerful meditation object. If you're interested, there's an online booklet called Inner Listening, written by Ajahn Amaro about it. And I've heard one monk compare it to the auditory equivalent of the perception of light. So frequently in this stage, that will become very prominent as well. You'll notice that. And if that happens, you can bring that to the fore. That can be kind of a stand-in for sukha, for pleasure. And you maintain breath in the background, but you can really make much of that sense of fullness, of still, of light, or of the nada sound. And just let it brighten the mind and still the mind. When the Buddha's walking through these steps, he compares it a bit to ascending through states of concentration to a mountain cow, because apparently they had mountain cows in India, ascending a mountain. And I like that analogy because if you think of it, the mountain cow always has 3 feet on the ground. So frequently you're straddling about 3 of these steps at a time. You're moving back and forth, and the mind will oscillate a little, and then it'll move on to the next. And then every now and again, perhaps you move all the way back to step 1 and just track the breath for a time. Be patient. Just sort of let the mind find its way. You're just nudging it in the right direction. Okay. Almost there. We're not going to go through all 16, don't worry. The next step is one breathes in and out, becoming sensitive to mental formations, chitta sankhara. And then the next step is one breathes in and out, calming mental sankhara, mental formations, mental activity. So this term chitta sankhara, mental formations, is defined only once in the suttas as perception and feeling. And how I think of it is sometimes after one encounters this state of deep calm and well-being, the mind settles into a state of stillness. And suddenly all of these perceptions we've been applying, all of these images, even say a single word we've been holding in our head, such as whole body or breath or light, it becomes too much, it's too coarse, and it drops. You can calm it. That mental formation can be calmed, relaxed. It's a bit like our minds are a sheet of parchment with calligraphy written over the front of it. And this state of, these steps of brightening the mind and becoming sensitive to sukha, pleasure, it's as if you're brightening that canvas more and more until you can just let all the letters drop and you're just left with that bright canvas. And this can be actually very confusing and disorienting because suddenly, first of all, frequently you don't realize you're kind of holding on to a residual perception, a residual mental formation of the body. Like say just the conception of the place your body occupies. And you need to let it go, and it sort of holds you back. So you have to relax all these mental formations, and it can be very disorienting. It's like stepping into a blank landscape. And this is where it can be really helpful to track, pinpoint, with very intense subtlety. It's an oxymoron. With a lot of concentration, that point of the breath, and just track the breath's whole movement. Or if you've been very sensitive to that field of the body or that bright light or sukha, pleasure, just being with that. But you need to give your mind something to rest on because its landscape of mental objects and words and formations have all sort of died down. And you need to give it something to rest on. So just track things very continuously. Frequently in this stage, I also find it's where that every thought manifests with a physical correlate, a pattern in the body. And as you become sensitive to the breath and the body, you become sensitive to those patterns. So sometimes you'll notice a tension arise, and frequently, say, in the head. And I find that one good way of calming that, of calming the thought just by disintegrating that pattern in the body, is you can, if you've used trigger points, you sort of find a point, a knot, and you press it really hard and it releases. And I find that really works with these mental formations, is you can watch that point of tension rise and you let the mind go to it and clench, and then it'll release into the heart. And then you find yourself in the third tetrad, which is mindfulness of mind. And in this tetrad, one says one becomes sensitive to the mind, one gladdens the mind, one calms the mind, concentrates the mind, and one liberates the mind. And this might be, we don't have time to go into this, and I think I've thrown enough at you this evening, but perhaps it's worth just pointing out that when you step into that landscape of calm clarity, it can be disorienting, and it sometimes can seem like there's not much to rest in, and the mind can be agitated. So it's sort of like you're left just with that blank parchment because all the letters have dropped off, and it can be a little bit strange. And this is the beauty of the second step in this tetrad of gladdening the mind. Because if you drop a little bead of golden dye onto that parchment, because all the other elements of that parchment have been cleared away, that bead of dye will pervade out with extreme rapidity. The mind is malleable and bright. So if you find yourself in this state of sort of calm, but it's difficult to know exactly what to do, dropping in a perception of metta, of loving kindness, just a word, or of light, can change everything. Because it'll echo and resonate through the mind and change the whole quality and brighten it much more than it would in a normal state of consciousness. I remember in Eat, Pray, Love, which is a great book, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about how you're left with a blankness in meditation, and then that blankness becomes a doorway. And I think it feels somewhat similar to me. It's like you're left with a blank space, and if you just invite something, love, then you find that it rises to become an extremely bright platform for the mind. And after the mind senses joy and well-being there, it'll willingly concentrate, which is the next step. It'll unify. It's like Ajahn Nisabho says, we think we have it all backwards. We think that once we attain concentration, we'll be happy. But it's more that once we're happy, we can attain concentration. And then the final step of just liberating the mind, and that can be taken in a variety of ways. But one might just be that when the mind is this calm and one turns it to look at things in one's life, one can watch as one lets go. Because the still mind is powerful and able to see clearly. So, we didn't get to the last four, but that's okay. It could seem like a esoteric and academic formulaic process, but it's in reality just an unbelievably detailed map back to our home, back to the rose apple tree, back to our hearts and our bodies and our somatic sense. Because we're really just coming back to reacquaint ourselves with something we've lost and forgotten and been alienated from. And that internal voice that you can access in the heart, what I think Ajahn Sucitta would term the chitta, is where our most innocent part lies, and where grace lies, and where suffering manifests or resonates. And it's also the thing that guides us in our lives and shows us how we can align our whole trajectory with the Dhamma. I remember asking a nun, a Catholic nun I know, what had kept her in robes for so long, and she said, after a time, the voice of God becomes the most important thing in the world. And we don't have that concept in Buddhism, but we can point to the fact that there is this knowledge internally, which Longpo Sumedho terms intuitive awareness, of how we can live purely and make ourselves into pure servants of the world and vessels of love. So this is a ladder to that. So I wish you all the best on that journey. COVID's been difficult. And yet it's been great. There's so much Dharma online now. There's one thing to force us Luddite forced monks into the internet. It was this. But you're right to ask about sila, morality. It's one aspect which is not very popular in the West, but, because it's just one, it's just a little lie. It's just 2 glasses of wine, But it's interesting. You remember being a kid, and when your parent drank a glass of beer, you notice, you feel the difference. It's not nothing. But specifically with morality, yeah, I find that supporting yourself in that can be difficult. I mean, it can be. I find a good reference point. The Buddha provided a pretty robust structure for lay people that's not utilized as much as it should be, I think. So yeah, there are the 5 precepts: not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, and then not taking intoxicants. But there's also the 8 precepts, which he recommended taking once a week on the full, half, and new moon days. And for us in modern society, it's sometimes easiest just to establish a day of the week as the Sabbath, Sunday or whatever. But those include the additional, no sexual conduct, not eating after noon, but you can have sugar and candy and such, which leads the mind to be very bright by the evening for meditation. And it just simplifies, there's no dinner dates, there's no making a meal, you just have time to practice. Not beautifying the self or engaging in entertainment, which is huge. Just putting aside the phone for the day, turning it off, let people know this is the day I practice, I'm sorry, I dedicate it to this. And not sleeping on high and luxurious sleeping places, which one can take it as an admonition to just be devoted to wakefulness. Try to stay up a little longer, really try to practice. And having a day in the week really centered around your meditation and your spiritual practice, people don't do it, but it's really helpful because it provides a reference point for everything else, and then you have this clean spot to stand on once a week where you get to see a little bit of the stickiness of the rest of the week, and that helps keep the 5 precepts and the other sila better, because it's hard when you're just kind of muddling through. It's the water you swim in. So to step out once a week onto dry land a little more lets you keep those other precepts day to day better. And you're right, the sila, I mean, people think of it as a restriction, but I think it's much better thought of as expanding the realm of virtue in your life. Like when the Buddha praised taking those 8 precepts, he said, one should have the thought, the noble ones do not kill. Why don't I for one day not kill? The noble ones don't, etc. So you're aligning your heart with that deeper side of things. So yeah, it's very helpful. And Ajahn Nisabho compares it to kind of, if you have good sila in your life, then you just crack a window and then the metta rushes in, the love. But you have to have that structure in place. And there's a huge sense of healing that can come from that. But I think, I know some people, they'll just take them every morning in front of the shrine, reiterate. You can have a little aditana in there, determination. So you can tell a friend that, look, here's a check to the political party I don't like. I'll call you if I break this precept. You got to mail it if I do that. That'll help. If you slip, which you will, almost certainly. Acknowledging it to a friend. Us monastics, this was Bhavarna Day, which is our end of rains retreat, Uposatha, our Sabbath day. But every 2 weeks, we confess with another monk every offense. And the other monk says, do you see? And we say, I see. Will you be restrained in the future? I'll be restrained in the future. And then you bow to the Buddha, you do a bit of chanting. Ritual's powerful. But sila is very helpful in brightening the mind, but I'd say one aspect which really isn't utilized as much in the West either is, dana, giving. I mean, that's the first paramita, the first spiritual perfection. So finding a way to give, even online, like, how can you help out? There's a great practice in Sri Lanka of not eating until you've given food. I think it's best held before dinner rather than breakfast. But that will change your life very quickly if you could do that, even half the time. Or you can just bring a cookie to like a neighbor. It doesn't take much. have a few pieces of candy you can give to a homeless person. And then also studying, like developing a tiered practice is really important, because you're not always, usually you can force yourself to sit, but sometimes the mind's just, it's all right. But instead, if you say memorize a sutta, Bhikkhu Bodhi says that Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the mindfulness of the discourse on turning the wheel of Dhamma, are the most profound words ever uttered in human history. And I think it's true. Those are profound teachings. What else would you memorize? So like, these are things worth drilling into your heart, because they will echo deeply over the years. And so that brightens the mind a lot. Like frequently I don't feel like sitting in the early mornings right away, but after I've studied and memorized some suttas, I memorize suttas every day if I can. Then when you sit, the mind's bright and imbued with that kind of power. So, a very good question.